Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to do introductions today. This is Jeff Beckman. I am the co-lead of PRISM, our LGBTQ BRG. I'm very proud to be part of this session today, along with my co-leader, Nishant Kumar, who co-leads PRISM, longtime member of the PRISM group, and works in our consumer intelligence and strategy team. As I think probably everyone on this call knows, June is Pride Month. And as we're wrapping up the month, I can't think of a better way to do that than to host this session today with our esteemed guest. And we're very honored to have Damien Atkins lead this session today. As you also know, he's our Senior Vice President, General Counsel and Secretary, and really was the thought leader behind putting this session together with somebody in the legal field who he has watched and respected over the years. So I hope this session is informative, thought-provoking, and hopefully you'll come away with some thoughts on what you can do as a Hershey employee to support and celebrate the diversity that I believe makes this company a very special place to work. So with that, I give you Damien.
Hey, thank you so much, Jeff. That was wonderful. Our guest today is Evan Wolfson. He needs no introduction. Evan was the founder and president of Freedom to Marry, the campaign that won same-sex marriage in the United States. Evan is a native of Pennsylvania. He's from Pittsburgh, which I found quite interesting. He has a BA from Yale College, law degree from Harvard Law School. He was a Peace Corps volunteer. He was also named as one of the most 100 influential people in the world by Time Magazine. Right now, he is a senior counsel at Denton's. And I guess one of your job titles is something I'm very jealous about, is Distinguished Practitioner in Grand Strategy.
It's my favorite title.
Yeah, at some point I want to get that title, add that title to my list.
At Yale, you have to say that much.
Anyway, Evan, thanks for joining us. Let's just get right to it. Today is the 5th anniversary of the landmark decision Obergefell versus Hodges, which guaranteed the right for same-sex marriage in the United States. I mean, in my view, this is one of the landmark decisions in American legal history and in American history, on par with Brown versus Board of Education or any others. Give me your thoughts on that and this great guy.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Damien, for inviting me, and for Hershey for having me. It's good to be there, in the sense that we're anywhere these days. Today is a very auspicious day, as you noted, because it is the anniversary, and that's a lot in the news these days. I have several pieces out, and people are talking about it because these are very difficult times, obviously, for our country and the world. The pandemic, the political dysfunction and challenges, the struggles and demands for racial equity and inclusion, prompted by the outrages over the killings. And in these difficult times, it's good to have good news. It's good to have something to look at. And the Freedom to Marry victory, I'm happy to say, is seen as a model that reflects many of the elements of success, many of the elements of how to win that today's activists, whether on racial justice or women's empowerment or immigrant rights or pushing back against discrimination or pushing hard to get our country back on track. These movements of today, including the ongoing LGBT movement, are able to take the elements of success from the campaign and adapt them to that work. So it's really good to have the opportunity to share some of those elements and to talk about the work we can do, and to have the proof in front of us that even when things are bad, things can change. We can make a difference. We, the people, can make a difference.
That's right. I mean, you began this journey of same-sex marriage equality this is the culmination of years and years of work and dedication. Could you talk a little bit about kind of how it got started and your role in it for everyone?
Sure. Well, even though, as you mentioned, I led the Freedom to Marry campaign, I was not the first person to think of the idea of gay people being able to marry, even in the darkest days of oppression. And let's remember, for gay people, there was a time in our lifetime when we were very oppressed and very marginalized and very discriminated against. Gay people were deemed illegal. Gay people were deemed sinners. Gay people were deemed medically ill, either pathetic or predatory. And this was the majority opinion, the opinion of experts and institutions. But despite that, people came along who had a different vision of what our country could be, what life could be. And so going back to what we usually talk about as the beginning of the modern gay rights movement, when there were riots and pushback and fighting against police harassment in bars across New York and other states because of discrimination. There was an incident at the Stonewall bar, which is just a few blocks from where I'm sitting now, and people fought back. People fought back against that ubiquitous police harassment, and that riot, that fight, that Stonewall moment helped launch an ongoing movement. So Stonewall was in 1969. This year we actually marked the 50th anniversary of the first commemoration, the first Pride March that ever happened the year after Stonewall, 50 years ago this year. And just within a few years of that, couples across the United States went to court seeking the freedom to marry. They challenged the denial. So as long ago as 50-ish years ago, same-sex couples were dreaming of love and commitment and the ability to marry. All of those courts said no, including the Supreme Court. One of those cases reached the Supreme Court in 1972, and the Supreme Court also rubber-stamped the discrimination and threw the couples out of court. I came along about 10 years later. I'm a little younger than that, so I wasn't at Stonewall, but in the 1980s, and particularly 1983, I was writing my law school thesis, and I wanted to write about something that would show how we could change things. And so I talked about why we should fight for the freedom to marry, why we should not take that no for an answer. And so from that moment on, 1983 on, the next 32 years, much of my time, much of my career, much of my energy went into turning that no into a yes, into mapping out a strategy and rallying people to do the work over time that would change things. And that is the 32-year story of my piece of the work that added to this momentum, this very long journey that did not obviously happen overnight and had many, many, many defeats and stumbles and setbacks. And at the beginning, most people thought it was impossible. Most people thought it was not even worth trying for. And we had told ourselves that message again and again and again. But when you give people hope, when you show people a pathway, and when you stick with the work, you can change things.
No, absolutely. I mean, let me ask you a question. Why did marriage matter? Why focus on marriage as opposed to, as you saw the recent case, employment discrimination or adopt? Like, why was it marriage? Why was marriage first?
Yeah, well, I believed, of course, that all these things are important. People should have protection against employment. People should be safe in the streets and in their homes. People should have freedom to speak and express themselves. Young people should have support and protection against bullying and the ability to dream. Older people should have the assurance that they're going to be able to retire with dignity and have their health protected and have access. All these things matter. But I believe that fighting for the freedom to marry would be important because marriage, I saw, was both a goal and a strategy. As a goal, to be denied marriage was to be denied something very, very important. It was to be denied the primary legal structure in which our society provides many important tangible economic and legal protections and responsibilities that touch every area of life, from birth to death, with taxes in between, whether it's access to health care or parenting rights or protection in the event of a dissolution or divorce or death or disease, whether it's being able to pool your resources as a family without adverse tax treatment, and so on and so on and so on. Marriage is important tangibly, and of course, marriage is important intangibly. Marriage has great meaning. The dream of love, the being held accountable for a commitment you make to another person, being able to build a family and connect families. Marriage has many, many important meanings, and to be denied all of that was to be denied something really significant. And I also believe that to acquiesce in that denial was to say that the government could pick and choose amongst us and say, you people are worthy, you people are not. And I believed our Constitution, even though the courts got it wrong at first, did not allow for that. So to me, marriage was important as a goal. But even beyond that, I thought that working for the freedom to marry was also a strategy. That by claiming the vocabulary of marriage, love, commitment, family, connection, dignity, By claiming that vocabulary, we would be seizing an engine of transformation that would change how non-gay people understand who gay people are, and ultimately also who trans people are. That by claiming this shared vocabulary, we would be helping people come to understand our common humanity. And that would change our ability not only to win marriage, but also to advance on all other fronts. So to me, marriage was important both as a goal and as a strategy. And as you pointed out just a week or so ago, we saw the proof that this remains true, because even after winning marriage, we have gone on to win other things that were important, including most recently from the Supreme Court, federal protection against employment discrimination. And that's really important. It's not marriage, but the marriage conversation, the marriage campaign, and the marriage momentum help bring in the allies, the voices, the support, the change of hearts and minds that set the stage for this next victory and what I hope will be the next and the next and the next if we keep doing our work.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. From a personal standpoint, I recall working with a woman at a law firm as a young associate, and this is before same-sex marriage was legal. And she referred to her partner as her spouse, and the things that she would have to do to mimic marriage by contract, right, and fees that she would have to pay with lawyers and conversations. And I was just kind of amazed, because I was like, she's a great person. Why does she have to go through all of this when Joe Blow and random person X can have no relationship, whatever, go down to City Hall and boom, you're done. So I think you're right. I mean, the focus on marriage is the fulcrum which the society is based, and to deny that, have the government choosing who gets it and who doesn't, was completely crazy to me.
Yeah, and I would just point out, I mean, the same thing is true. We see this pattern again and again in civil rights advances, this building blocks to breakthroughs to building blocks. We see this, for example, in the upsurge right now, the righteous upsurge in protest against abusive policing and so on, where the conversation has begun and is in some ways centered on policing and the challenges of ending systemic racism in the criminal justice system. But of course, the conversation has broadened beyond that, because policing, while specific, concrete, and important, is only one part of the work we need to do in combating racism. Similarly, last week, we won another decision in the Supreme Court protecting the young immigrants, kids who came to this country who don't really know any other country, who have grown up in this country, called the Dreamers, and the Supreme Court's preservation of the DACA program against the Trump administration's attempt to take it away. That's talking about a slice of immigrants, a part of the immigrant story, but the empathy and the storytelling and the power of the Dreamers has helped create a context in which we can push back against the toxicity on immigration generally and get our country back on track, I hope, on meaningful immigration reform that doesn't only affect young people, important as that is. So, no one victory can be everything. But if you wait until you have everything before you work on anything, you're not going to accomplish something. And so it's important to use your building blocks and understand how they generate momentum and support if you keep doing the work to make the country better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so just for our audience to know, you wrote a fantastic piece in Slate this week that covers a lot of these issues. There's a quote in that piece that I wanted to read to the audience and have you expound on it a little bit. And I'll read it. It's not that long, but I want to read it just for folks. It says, "Transactional change asks for what seems immediately attainable, what the powers that be are willing to dole out. But transformational change envisions the world as we want it, through hope, clarity, tenacity, and building block work brings it home. The Freedom to Marry campaign, originally divided as impossible, drew on these elements of how to win. It was transformational. Its goal was clear and big and bold. It stuck to its strategy, engaged in movement, and paradigmatically it worked." So I think what you're talking about here is having a big, bold vision, having the building blocks win upon win, and then creating what we call in the business world a flywheel effect. Are you seeing that happen in other areas? Black Lives Matters, are you feeling that in other areas, part of the freedom struggle?
Absolutely. I think these elements and others are the elements on how to win. And, change is not easy. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't drop as a gift from above. It's not necessarily permanent. You have to keep doing the work. And we stand on the shoulders of so many. We march alongside so many. But we also have proof, as in the Freedom to Marry story, that when you do this work over time, conveying hope, bringing people in, sticking with it, having a strategy, you can win. You can change things. Big things do change. And so I see that, as we've discussed in the Black Lives Matter moment that we're having now, which of course didn't come out of nowhere and didn't just begin with Black Lives Matter. It builds on decades and decades, indeed centuries of struggle and inspiration and defeat and advance. And we see that in the immigration story. We see that with women's empowerment. The Supreme Court next week, it has a very important abortion rights decision. It should be an easy win in support of reproductive freedom, because it's very much like a case a few years ago where we won. But, the court could do the right thing, it could do the wrong thing. Regardless of what it does, we're going to have to keep working. And, most importantly, we have to get our country back on track. So the elements of hope, clarity, and tenacity, and then doing the work, building block by building block by building block, are how you get change to happen.
So let me flip to a couple of employee questions. We got a bunch in before the session. The first is on the recent, the Bostock versus Clayton County case, banning employment discrimination for lesbian, gay, transgender folks,
and non-gay people. It applies to everyone.
Exactly. One of the questions we got from the audience is now it's illegal for companies to fire people because of that status. But there is still a lot of fear about coming out because it would damage promotion or job opportunities or networking opportunities. What do you say to folks who are feeling that or suffering that?
Yeah, well, one thing I would say, and I actually have a piece up today in the Pittsburgh Jewish Chronicle, so a little closer to Hershey, where I talk about some of the, the lessons and meaning. And one of the things I say in that piece is this doesn't take Pennsylvania's legislators off the hook. In Harrisburg, a bill to provide employment protection and further protection against discrimination across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has been pushed year after year after year, and the lawmakers in Harrisburg have refused to act on it. They need to act, and they need to bring more protections and more conversation to Pennsylvania. The fact that we now have federal protection is significant, and it brings protection to employees in Pennsylvania, but not at every level and not in every detail. And it also doesn't send the same moral meaning and moral statement that Pennsylvania should be making to its workers. So this doesn't take them off the hook. That's right. And at the same time, I would also say to gay people, to transgender people, to people of color, to women, others, all of us who in one way or another have encountered barriers or fear discrimination, whether or not it actually is going to happen, we also have to do some lifting. Unfortunately, and maybe unfairly, change does not just drop from the sky. If people don't step forward and tell their story and sometimes take risks when they can, then things don't change. We need to step up. And the moments of change that we celebrate came about because people were willing to take a risk sometimes. And often when people take a risk, they find that there actually wasn't a problem, that other people do the right thing. Companies do the right thing. Sometimes government does the right thing. But if you don't give a chance for that to happen, it's very hard to move people to do the right thing. So I would say that it is important. It is right to recognize that it's not easy, and people do face a risk, and sometimes people are afraid, and companies have to go the extra mile and not just wait to be asked or pushed. And on the other hand, we can't just wait for companies to magically do the right thing. We have to get in there and help people do the right thing. Because one of the things that not just people like me talking and people like you representing have shown, diversity, inclusion, having different people of different talents being able to come forward actually is good for teams, it's good for companies, it's good for the economy, it's good for the society. We've shown that again and again and again. And it's not just individual opinions saying that, there's a whole body of research showing that effect. And so you don't have to come in from a position of fear. You can come in from a position of, look, I'm trying to make this the best team, the best company, the best economy, the best society that we can have.
That's right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, let me have another employee question. What is the next battleground in the freedom struggle? We have marriage, employment discrimination. What's next? Is it adoption? What's next?
Well, if the questioner means, for the LGBT movement, then I would say the battlegrounds, they're not really next because they've been part of the struggle all along. But as we win, we have the wins that we can harness to the work of where we haven't yet won. And so, yes, we won federal protection against employment discrimination, but we don't yet have federal protection against discrimination, for example, in places of public accommodation, which are businesses, restaurants, theaters, etc., bathrooms, and we don't have that. We won a big step forward at the federal level, but as I said earlier, we want to see that also at the state level, at the local level, and in company policies. So achieving non-discrimination in every area of life, at every level of government, in every part of the country, is still a huge piece of work that we have taken a big step down the road for, but we haven't yet completed that journey. Beyond that, and I should say in addition to that, there is still some overt discrimination practiced by the government, most of which we've succeeded in eliminating. But the Trump regime has declared war on trans people, trying to deny trans people access to health care, trying to kick trans people who've been serving our country in the military out of the armed forces, trying to poison the well at the federal and state levels.
Right.
And so we have to speak up and defend and push back against those instances of discrimination. We see an effort by the opponents of LGBT people, gay and lesbian and transgender and bisexual inclusion and so on. We see the effort to carve out special licenses to discriminate. Where we've won protection, they're trying to subvert those protections, often under the familiar banner of religious exemptions, which were used in the African American struggle and women's struggle as carve-outs, ways to try to block civil rights advance. So we have to be vigilant and fight back against those religious exemptions that are trying to give permission to discriminate.
That's right.
And beyond all of that, we don't just want good laws, we want good lives. And so we have to do the work community by community, family by family, place by place, to really think about, are we sending the right message to young people? Are we sending the right message to older people who, as I said earlier, need protection and support when they retire or age? We want to make sure that people feel able to dream big and to have a fulfilling life. And so there's a lot of work to be done that isn't just about the law. It's about the culture that's created. It's about the messages you send to other people. It's about the way you open your heart. And I guess I just have to end by saying that's the LGBT version.
Right.
But you could run down a very similar kind of list of work ahead, whether it's for African Americans or immigrants or Muslims or Jews or people of color or women, or really you go right through the list of all of us as human beings have these needs and challenges, and we have our particular circumstances and barriers, and we need to make progress on all of these. And one of the things that makes me proud about the LGBT human rights movement, which I'm still part of, even though freedom to marry succeeded and is done, we still have all this other work, is that our movement has stood in solidarity with these other movements, with Black Lives Matters, with immigrants, and so on. And I think that's really important because these communities overlap. We're people, we're in families, we're in communities, we have friends, we're part of the society, we're part of companies. And we have to stop looking at it as us versus them, or just this and then that and then that, and really try to see things as a way we can come together better and make things better for all of us. And then on top of all of that, and then I'll stop, I think even the most urgent thing we all have to do, even apart from our own particular needs and challenges, which are important and on which we should work, is we have to get our country back on track. Our country is suffering from a terrible and aberrational regime that we didn't vote for, but came into power, and is doing tremendous damage to America as well as to people, different peoples, different lives, different communities, and so on. And we have to do something about that. And I know that a company like Hershey doesn't take political stands and so on, but we as individuals can and must. Elections matter. And America is at a turning point right now. This pandemic is horrible, but it's a lot more horrible in the United States because of the way the regime in power has responded to it. Elections matter.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you said that it is individuals' responsibility to do what you can to mete out, to improve things and spark and drive change. I want to turn to a concept that I talk a lot about in terms of the racial justice movement, allyship. What can others do to help drive change and improve things? And the reason why it struck me, and again, I was preparing for this, you have said that you have heroes that you've looked up to in your life. Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, Martin Luther King. And then, one of the names struck me as kind of like, there's the folks that everyone knows, and there's someone that just kind of stood out in the list. And it was Dan Foley, who was, I guess, your co-counsel in the Hawaii case, same-sex marriage case. And why Dan Foley?
Yeah, so as you said, Dan Gay was my co-counsel in the Hawaii case. He's the one who actually brought the Hawaii marriage case. The Hawaii marriage case was the case in the 1990s. That was the first case, after I told you about those earlier cases. 20 years later comes this case in Hawaii, and it was the first time we were able to get a court to give us our day in court, to not just throw out the couples, to not just say this discrimination in marriage is okay. That case was brought by Dan Foley. Dan is a non-gay man, and he, when approached by the couples, said to himself, well, I don't know if we're going to win, but I don't think it's fair that I should be able to get married to the person I love, and that these other people in my community should not. And even though he didn't feel like he knew a huge amount about it, and it wasn't really his cause or community in the beginning, he brought that case. And had he not do that, the whole decades-long struggle that culminated in the victory we're celebrating today would have been very, very different and much, much delayed. And so Dan, and the reason the couples went to Dan as a non-gay man and a local, formerly ACLU attorney, now in private practice, was because they had originally approached me when I was working at Lambda Legal, one of the leading LGBT rights organizations in the country. And Lambda refused to allow me to take the case. Lambda, like all the other major LGBT groups, because there was division within the community, division within the organization about whether this is the right timing, the right priority, whether we should be working on marriage. With AIDS and with the Reagan administration and the Bush administration and tremendous political hostility, was this the right time to try to tackle marriage? Hadn't we already lost in all those courts? How could we do this? We have so much else we need to do, and so on. And so the couples then went to Dan. Dan and I became friends and began bonding as we communicated. Back then, we didn't have the internet, so it was by phone and by fax. It was years before we even met. But we began working. Lambda allowed me to help him behind the scenes. And so on the strength of that relationship and friendship and his leadership and his willingness to move forward, we won that case in Hawaii in 1993 in the Hawaii Supreme Court. And that was the turning point that put us on the decades-long path to victory. Mm-hmm. Dan then invited me to come into the case, and this time Lambda said yes as co-counsel. And we went on to win the trial, which became the world's first ever victory for marriage, for the freedom to marry, in which the court for the first time said that if government wants to discriminate, it has to show a reason. And there is no good reason.
That's right.
But for Dan Foley, this would not have happened. And so I do celebrate him as a hero and as, like a brother to me now, a close friend. He went on to become a judge. He's now been working as a retired judge. He was appointed a special master by the Hawaii Supreme Court just in the last few weeks to develop a system for releasing prisoners because of COVID, and to figure out the balance of what the prosecution was saying, what the defense was saying, what the needs were, and the public health concerns in order to get prisoners out of harm's way in a rational and coherent way. So he continues to do good work, building on the tremendous heroism he showed in playing such an important part in the marriage story.
But if you look at someone like a Dan Foley, a non-gay man, he's clearly an ally. And, I look at someone like his story and his relationship to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how, other non-gays can become allies to the freedom struggle, like a Dan Foley. And I think folks in the audience would love to hear, how does one become an ally? How does one become a good ally? What does a good ally look like? What can I do to help?
Yeah, well, I think being a good ally, you probably have had diversity and inclusion seminars where you've said some of these things, does begin with listening, doing some homework, trying to understand, acknowledging where you may not have understood things before, and accepting that it's okay, because none of us sees everything right away and all the time. People can change and contribute, but then adding your voice, adding your support, and there are all kinds of ways to be involved. You can join an organization, you can donate to an organization, you can do the action alerts that an organization that you respect provides you. You don't have to come up with your own idea all the time. It's like, here today there's a petition, tomorrow there's a protest, the next day there's go to meet with your lawmaker and tell your story and add your voice. Mm-hmm. The list of those kinds of concrete action steps are significant, and organizations are the way in which we come together to deliver change, even when individually we may not be sure what our own role is. But individually, we also have a role. We have, as I said, first of all, the opportunity to learn more, to read history, to talk to friends and so on, and then in conversation, to add our voice to the momentum for change. Each one of us may be the best ambassador to some people. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Black Lives Matters, National Immigration Law Center. These organizations are wonderful. I belong to all of them. They speak out, they do things, they give action alerts and so on, but they may not be the one who convinces your Aunt Millie or your college roommate, right, or your coworkers. You may be the one that does that. The chief engine of change in the marriage work, we always said, is conversation. Mm-hmm. And so talking about these questions, adding our voices, making the case, having done a little bit of homework, and tenaciously, persistently, patiently engaging with people to help them move is a real contribution to making a better workplace, making a better community, making a better polity.
I completely agree. Let me turn to another employee question. I don't take over the entire conversation. Going back to the Bostock versus Clayton County. Employee wants to know, were you surprised given the current makeup of the Supreme Court? Were you shocked? I know I was completely shocked, but I'm just curious to know kind of what your thoughts were on that. Were you surprised that we got the ruling and who actually wrote it?
So my role,
particularly John Roberts' role, who I thought was interesting. Yeah,
my familiar role within our movement has always been the annoying optimist, the one who really always believes, and in truth did believe, we can win. I always believed we could win, going over those 30 plus years in the marriage work and so on. And so as we teed up this push to achieve federal protection, I also believed we could win. And I kept saying to people, I won't be surprised if we lose, given who has been packed onto the court. But I also won't be surprised if we win, because the answer is clear and right, because we've created tremendous public momentum, because we have the voices of companies and businesses and others saying this is the right thing to do. And the court takes note of these things. These things matter. They mattered in marriage work, they mattered in the DACA ruling, and they mattered in the employment ruling. And they don't always deliver. Nothing works all the time. But these are the elements of how to succeed. So I actually believed we would win. And I wrote a piece a year and a half ago, maybe, that in the Hill, if people want to look it up, thehill.com, saying why we would win, why this was the right answer. Having said all of that, I wasn't surprised when we won. But I was certainly very happy that we won and relieved that we won. And I will say that I didn't expect it to be 6-3. I expected to be 5-4. And 5-4, first rule of Supreme Court litigation, count to 5. Right. 5 is what you need. To win 6 was a tremendously powerful and significant. And it goes to, as you said, not just the fact that we persuaded and helped create a climate for Gorsuch, who wrote the opinion, a Trump appointee, but also for John Roberts, the Chief Justice, who's also very conservative, very right-wing. And I think there what happened was that we had created a momentum in the climate, and right now, other forces also, the pandemic, the racial justice protests, the anger in the country, the pressure that some of us are putting out there to expand the court in order to deal with the way in which the Republicans have packed the Supreme Court over the last few years. All of these things, I think, created an environment that encouraged Chief Justice John Roberts to do the right thing. Now, obviously, I don't know him personally. I don't know what's in his heart. I don't know what's in his head. But I do know that I believe that judges, even when they conscientiously try to follow the law and set aside their own personal views, are shaped by the environment in which we live, that we the people create. And I think that's how we succeeded. The momentum from the marriage win, the climate of today, the political pressures, and the clear legal right answer, I think combined to get us that victory.
Yeah, I completely agree. I will say I was surprised by John Roberts. Gorsuch, I didn't know too much, but I was totally shocked by Roberts, given his. If you look at the opinions he's had in other and other similar cases, I was totally surprised. And I agree with you. You know, you said.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No,
Go ahead.
no, they do say that the Supreme Court reads the newspapers, right?
Well, just on the point, I want to just point out that Roberts, 5 years ago in the marriage case, he at oral argument asked one of the attorneys. He said, you know, if Bill can marry Jane, but Judy can't marry Jane, why isn't that sex discrimination? Right. So he understood the argument. He didn't have the guts, the courage, the principles to do the right thing in the marriage case. But 5 years later, with this momentum in the context of employment, and with the fact that we already had 5 votes, right, and he was going to be the 6th, right, it created a different environment for him.
Right. No, I completely agree. We got probably another 5 to 7 minutes left, so I want to just ask just maybe 1 or 2 other questions. You know, I'm a big believer in the power of reading and to change mindset and change the way, you know, we think about things. You know, you have said in your life that, you know, reading this book by John Boswell called Christianity, Social Tolerance, and Homosexuality changed your life. Could you talk to the audience about how this book changed your life? I mean, I got a copy of it. It's mind-blowing. I've been reading it. It's completely mind-blowing, but I'd love to just, you know, the influence of reading and how it's changed your mindset, and particularly this book.
Yeah, so Boswell's book came out in the early 80s, I think 81, while I was in law school, and I read about it and immediately knew I had to read it because history was and still is my great passion. And this book is a several thousand page, I think, I haven't looked at it in a while, volume that traces the first 3,000 or 4,000 years of Western civilization in its treatment of homosexuality. How were gay people treated in biblical times, in classical Greek and Roman times, in the Renaissance, etc. And he tells the story and shows how different societies at different times had very different understandings of sexuality, homosexuality, gay people, and some treated homosexuality and gay people very, very well, exalting it as an ideal and a standard, and others were very oppressive and dark. And that's a very different story than what we had thought in our era, where you just sort of assume that the way things are today are the way they've always been, that it's always been scorned, it's always been stigmatized, it's always been marginalized. So back in the early 80s, when I came to write my law school thesis, I knew I wanted to write about how to make the world better for gay people. And reading this book was one of the major influences, because what it showed me was, if it had once been different, it could be different again. That's right. And the way things are today, however good or however bad, are not written in stone. We, the people, can make a change. We can do things to change that. So that inspired me to really draw on history, but then look at what are the elements of change? What are the elements of how to win? What is the way in which you seize that engine of transformation of hearts and minds to create a new climate for the law and the politics? And that's what the paper became about back in 1983. And that's pretty much what I've been talking about and writing about ever since. So that book did change my life.
Right. No, it is just an absolutely fascinating book. Just two more questions for you. One is, it's an abiding passion of mine, and I think that, looking at how the influence of technology has changed the discussion and the ability to create that environment of social change. If you look at Black Lives Matter movement that started a couple years ago, the power of the camera phone, right? It unleashed the power to document. And then you have social media has unleashed the power to distribute, one to many seamlessly. So the power of technology has really kind of added momentum and accelerated the pace of change. How do you think, what's your take on the influence of technology and sparking social change and creating that environment that influences so many decision makers?
Yeah, well, there's no question that technology has an impact. It gives new tools, new tactics, new opportunities. What Zeynep Tufekci, the author of a book called Twitter and Tear Gas, describes as the affordances, what you're able to do because you now have the internet, the megaphone, the microphone, et cetera, that you weren't necessarily able to do in the same way before. And they come, though, with pros and cons. So technology doesn't just give us everything now better that changes everything permanently for the better or what have you. You have to use them right, and you have to use those technologies in balance with other classic elements of how to succeed. So what I'm talking about is, for example, if you take internet activism and the ability through a hashtag and clicking and immediately calling a crowd to come together to join in a protest, it can be very effective in generating a large protest. The question then is, does that protest lead to the change you want? It may awaken conversation, it may awaken hearts and minds, it may set the stage, but how do you bring the victory home? And there, I think one of the clear lessons is that technology alone doesn't just magically do everything. You still need to vote. You still need to elect the right legislators. You still need organizations who are more institutional, not just coming together for a protest or on a hashtag, but who are doing the day-by-day nitty-gritty work of engaging and organizing and mobilizing and delivering and fundraising and making decisions that reflect changes instead of having to just have a group kind of momentum or consensus. So it's not either or. The good news is we don't have to say which one is better. They both have strengths and weaknesses. They both have things that can contribute to delivering change. But technology alone does not magically mean we're in a new day of everything changing. The fact that we have had incredibly inspiring, important, and so far effective protests and engagement has created a climate of understanding and attitude shift that give us the opportunity to bring home legal and political victories. But we still have to bring them home. They're not going to come home by themselves. That requires those classic elements that I just talked about earlier. And I'll just end by saying, think about the March on Washington. The March on Washington in 1963, where Dr. King gave the "I Have a Dream" speech. That was organized back in a day when we did not have cell phones. We did not have the internet. We did not have faxes. We had mimeographs and some telephones and so on. And nevertheless, they organized an event that was a benchmark, not the beginning and not the end, but an important stepping stone in the progress that led to the Civil Rights Act, which 50 years later is what gave us one of the key tools for winning the LGBT victory. Building blocks are how you succeed. And it's not technology as magic, it's technology as tools. But tools still need to serve a strategy.
That's right. And
strategy depends on the work.
That's right. Absolutely right. You still have to show up and you still have to make it happen. So,
and you have to vote.
And you have to vote. My last question, I'd like to end these on kind of more personal notes. And again, as I was preparing for this, I noted something just fascinating, and I want to just kind of end on this question. So do you still carry in your wallet what you hope to be your epitaph?
I do, but I actually forgot to wear it sitting in my house today. I do carry that, but go ahead.
And you carry a copy of this from the 1987 obituary of Bo Dai. It says, Bo Dai, 83, Emperor of Vietnam, and bon vivant. Why do you carry that in your wallet?
Yeah, so Bao Dai, as you said, was the longtime ruler of Vietnam back even before the American involvement in what became known to us as the Vietnam War. And this obituary, Emperor and Bon Vivant, I thought, well, now that's something to aspire to.
Right.
If I could be described when I die as Emperor and Bon Vivant, won't I have lived an enjoyable and meaningful life? So it's really partly a joke, but it's also a reflection that, you really do want to think about what do you leave behind? What have you accomplished in life? And that is something that matters to me as someone who loves history and who believes we can make a difference.
Yeah, I would say you've lived an incredible life already, and tremendous impact, not just on yourself and immediate family members, but the entire country and the world at large. So I want to thank you personally for all that you have done and continue to do to advance the freedom struggle and elsewhere. Thank you again for coming to Hershey and sharing your thoughts with us. I really, really appreciate it. This was fantastic, and I'll definitely keep in touch. You'll be hearing from me. Thank you very much, Evan.
I'll look forward to that chocolate in the mail.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay strong, wear masks, and let's get our country back on track.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.